Hello, Heero here, and today we're gonna look at the Herta, an insane big brain Erudition unit with a unique focus on building up a counter to power up her enhanced skill to deal big PP damage. I'll be discussing her kit, builds, Lightcones, and possible teams. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information shown is from the creator experience server, so some things could still change when her banner drops. Let's start with a talent, Hand Them Over, which does a couple of things related to this counter above enemies. First, when enemies enter battle, Herta inflicts one stack of interpretation on them denoted by the counter. And at the beginning of every wave, she applies 25 stacks of it on a random target, prioritizing elite or higher enemies. Interpretation can stack up to 42 times, and if an enemy dies, their stack transfers to another enemy, prioritizing elite or higher enemies. This is Herta's main gimmick and is built up using her and her allies' attacks, with you wanting to get as much stacks on one enemy as possible. This is cause each stack of interpretation boosts her enhanced skills damage by 8% to the main target and 4% to adjacent targets. And if you have another Erudition unit, the buff per stack increases to 16% and 8% respectively. So, without another Erudition unit, at max interpretation stacks, it buffs her enhanced skill damage by a total of 335% for the main target and 168% for adjacent targets. However, with another Erudition unit in the team, at max interpretation stacks, the buff to her enhanced skills increases to 672% for the main target and 335% for adjacent targets. So as much as possible, you want to run her with a second Erudition unit, otherwise her damage output drops significantly. And this isn't even considering the other benefits a second Erudition brings her because of her bonus abilities. But moving on to her skill, Big Brain Energy. This skill inflicts one stack of interpretation on the main target, and it's quite unique in the sense that it can hit every enemy in the field, like an AoE given that you target the center enemy. This is because this skill has 3 damage instances with a chain reaction-like effect. The first is a single hit on the primary target, then a blast attack hitting a maximum of 3 enemies, and finally a final blast attack that hits every enemy given you target the enemy in the center. But as for her enhanced skill, hear me out. No, legit, that's the name of her skill. But since we're in the topic, hear me out though. It follows similar mechanics as her normal skill but with a few differences. It has an additional instance of AoE damage at the end, higher multipliers, and it benefits from several damage increasing buffs based on the number of interpretation stacks, with more stacks equaling more damage. This is her main damage source, and it's both an AoE and a single target nuke because of all the buffs it gets. However, you only want to use it when you have 42 stacks of interpretation. This is because you lose out on so much bonus damage from her talent and a 50% ice damage buff from one of her bonus abilities. Note, the primary target's interpretation counter gets reset to 1 after using this enhanced skill. And you can only use it if you have 1 stack of inspiration gained from her ult, denoted by this counter. But speaking of her ult, told you magic happens, it's a massive ice AoE that does a couple of things. First, it gives a 100% action advance for her next turn, an 80% attack buff for 3 turns, and gives her 1 stack of inspiration, allowing her to use her enhanced skill. But most important of all, it arranges the number of interpretation stacks on all enemies, prioritizing placing the highest number on elites or higher. This ensures that high-value targets will always have the highest interpretation stacks before using her enhanced skill, while also enabling her to deal more damage because of that massive 80% attack buff. As for her talent, Vibe Checker, in the overworld, it marks 3 chests in the map. Poor Numby. Even he got power crept. But in battle, it gives her a massive 60% attack buff for 2 turns, and it deals massive true damage to enemies in the simulated and divergent universes. For those that don't know, true damage is basically a damage instance that isn't affected by any sort of buffs, debuffs, or effects on both the user and the enemy. But for ability priority, I recommend leveling her talent and skill first, then her ult, and finally basics. But you can just ignore her basics because most of the time you won't really use it anyway. As for Herta's bonus abilities, her first one, Aloofly Honest, allows allies to inflict 1 stack of interpretation to all enemies they hit, while also restoring 3 energy to Herta per enemy hit with a maximum of 15 energy for hitting 5 enemies. And it also gives her enhanced skill a 50% ice damage buff if its primary target has 42 interpretation stacks. This synergizes especially well with AoE or high attack frequency units, and it's really useful in getting her 220 energy cost ult and building her interpretation stacks faster. And it's another reason why you should only really use her enhanced skill when the enemy has 42 interpretation stacks, otherwise you lose out on that massive 50% ice damage buff. As for her second one, it gives several benefits if there's another Erudition unit in the team. First, it gives a permanent party-wide 80% crit damage buff. And it sets her first bonus abilities, bonus energy, to calculate for at least 3 enemies hit instead of 1 if you hit less than 3 enemies. This not only allows you to invest in less crit damage to focus on other offensive stats for Herta and the party, but it also makes it easier to build your ult even in content without a lot of enemies, since the party will always regen a minimum of 9 energy for her when attacking. Aside from this ability lets allies inflict 1 extra stack of interpretation on the enemy hit with the highest stacks. And if the ally is an Erudition unit, this increases by 2 for a total of 3 stacks. With this ability active, Herta is able to inflict up to 5 stacks of interpretation when using her skill, while other Erudition units can inflict up to 4, and non-erudite teammates can inflict up to 2. Again, this just further emphasizes the importance of running her with another Erudition unit, because without one, not only does her damage output drop significantly, it also becomes harder and more clunkier to play her. As for her last one, for every stack of interpretation inflicted, it gives her a stack of the answer buff capping up to 99 stacks, with each stack increasing her ultimate's damage by 1% with a maximum increase of 99%. With her kit out of the way, we can talk about her Eidolons. Her E1, whenever she uses her enhanced skill, it calculates an additional 50% interpretation stacks based on the target with the highest stacks, and it resets the target back to 15 stacks instead of 1. So for example, if the target has 42 stacks of interpretation, her enhanced skill calculates an extra 21 for a total of 63 stacks. Meaning, her talent skill damage buff can go all the way to 1008% for the primary target and 504 for adjacent ones. Aside from this, it also makes sure the primary target will always have a minimum of 15 stacks, making it easier and faster to build up to 42. And if you have her E2, after entering battle, she gains 1 stack of inspiration, while her ult now gives 2 stacks. And it also advances her action by 35% after using her enhanced skills. This enables Herta to spam back-to-back enhanced skills with the bonus inspiration stacks. And its action advance pairs really well with the 15 stack reset from E1, making it easier to get full stacks in time for her second enhanced skill. As for her E4, it's a permanent 12% speed buff to every Erudition unit in the team, including Herta. Overall, it's pretty good because it results in more turns for Erudition units to build Herta's ult and interpretation stacks. And finally, her E6 increases her ice rest spend by 20%, and it buffs her ult's damage depending on the number of enemies, going from a 140% buff with 3 or more enemies, to 50% for 2, and 400% for 1. This of course synergizes with other rest reduction or rest spend increasing buffs in the game. And it also turns her ult into even more of a nuke, which is neat since it allows you to launch a big burst of damage when you combo it with her enhanced skill. With her Eidolons out of the way, let's talk about Lightcones. Her gorgeous signature gives her 12% bonus crit rate, and whenever she uses an ult, it gives her skill and ult a 60% buff for 3 turns, and regens 1 skill point since her ult does cost more than 220 energy. This LC with all of its offensive buffs enables huge damage from Herta, but the neat thing about this LC is that it negates the SP cost of her enhanced skills, which makes SP management for her teams just a bit easier. Eternal Calculus would be her best free-to-play option for general use. It gives her a ramping attack buff that gets stronger the more enemies you hit, with a 52% attack buff being the highest bonus she can get. Aside from this, it also gives 12% bonus speed after hitting 3 or more enemies, which is always nice for getting more turns to build interpretation stacks and ult energy. But she does get quite a bit of bonus attack in battle from her kit, relics, and supports, so attack stats can become diluted and give diminishing returns if you get too much of it. So just consider that when using this LC. Another decent 5-star is Himiko's signature. It gives a lot of attack based on the number of enemies present, with a 45% attack buff being the highest bonus it gives at S1. Aside from this, it also gives a 30% damage buff whenever an enemy is broken. But in modes without a lot of enemies, or in scenarios you can't reliably apply weakness break, this LC's damage output and performance can become inconsistent. Before Dawn is also a pretty good option as well. It gives 36% bonus crit damage, and it also buffs her skill and ult damage by 18%, which is pretty neat. The only real downside to this Lightcone is that its FUA bonus is useless for Herta, but regardless, it's still a pretty viable option. As for 4 stars, her best option would be the Battle Pass Lightcone. It gives her a massive 32% damage buff at R1 and 60% at R5, and she can easily meet its passive's 160 max energy requirement with her 220 energy cost ult. So you get a huge damage buff just by equipping it. However, the problem with this LC is that it's paid and it's rather expensive and it takes a while to get refinements for. Genius Repose is another great option, especially if you have it at higher superimpositions. It gives some nice bonus attack and a crit damage bonus for 3 turns when Herta defeats enemies. The only downside to this LC is that it's a gotcha cone, so some people might not even have it. And it can become inconsistent if Herta can't kill an enemy every 3 turns. The Day the Cosmos Fell is a decent free-to-play option, giving Herta a bit of attack and a lot of crit damage when attacking Ice-weak enemies. The problem is, it's limited to Ice-weak content since it becomes super inconsistent if you can't reliably hit Ice-weak enemies every 2 turns. And finally, Breakfast is also another free-to-play option, giving Herta a 24% damage buff and some bonus attack every time she defeats an enemy. Overall, it's a decent general use option if every other option is taken. But just like Genius Repose, it can become inconsistent if Herta can't kill an enemy every 3 turns. But with her Lightcones out of the way, let's look at possible relics. Her best set would be Scholar. Not only does it provide some bonus crit rate, it also buffs your skill and ult damage by 20%. But the neat thing is, this set also enables her ult to buff her skill by an additional 25% for a total of a 45% buff, which is pretty good since you always combo from her ult into her enhanced skill anyway. Glacial Forest is also a decent option, giving her bonus ice damage. But just like Scholar, it also enables her ult to buff her skill. But in this case, it does so with a 2-turn 25% crit damage buff. This set of course would output lower damage numbers compared to Scholar due to the sheer amount of buff Scholar provides. So only use it if you don't have good Scholar pieces. The new Poet set is also usable since it gives Herta a massive 32% crit rate buff. However, in order to get its full buff, you'd need to have Herta at 95 speed or lower before the battle begins, which can only be done if you don't activate her speed traces, which puts her right at 95 speed with this set's 8% speed reduction, meaning you absolutely cannot have any speed substat rolls in any of your relics if you want to use this set. It's up to you if you want to run this set or not, though I personally don't recommend it, because it's a lot more hassle to dodge specific substats. Imagine getting that perfect crit and attack piece only for it to become unusable since it has one speed roll, meaning it would be harder and would take longer to farm because it adds a whole new layer to the relic farming RNG, which of course isn't fun. And as usual, 2-piece combos are great options for giving her beneficial stats like crit, attack, or speed. Just pick whichever one works the best for you. As for planar sets, one of her best and most consistent sets is Izumo Gensei, seeing how she does want to be ran with 2 Erudition units. It gives her 12% attack and crit rate, which is pretty good in ensuring her damage stays consistent. But Rutilliant Arena is a bit better when it comes to skill damage if you can reliably hit its 70% crit rate requirement. It gives an 8% crit rate bonus plus a 20% buff to her skill, which is pretty good for enabling her enhanced skills to do massive damage. And for Pure Fiction, Sigonia is a really good option. It gives 4% crit rate, but the important thing is that it gives up to a 40% crit damage buff as long as you can beat 10 enemies, which isn't too hard to do in Pure Fiction. But outside of Pure Fiction, it isn't really too good. With her possible sets out of the way, let's talk about stats. Looking at all her stats, traces, and abilities, she gains quite a bit of attack and crit damage due to all the buffs in her kit. Aside from this, she has a decent 104 speed with her traces activated, so make sure to consider that when building. Her main stats, you want a crit rate chest, speed or attack boots, an attack rope, and an ice or attack orb. For the orb, just use whichever has the best substats. But generally, ice would be better because she already gets a lot of attack from many sources. Now some of you may be wondering, why not an energy rope instead of an attack one? Seeing how her ult does have a massive 220 energy cost. Well, it's because she gains a lot of energy from her allies due to her passive. So despite not having an energy rope, I found that you can consistently get her ult around the time you build 42 interpretation stacks, so I never really found energy to be a problem. But this is of course with high attack frequency characters or batteries helping build her ult. So I suggest testing things out on your own with your own setups to see what works for you. As for substat priority, you want to focus on crit rate first, then speed until your desired breakpoint, then crit damage, and finally attack. I recommend trying to get around 70 to 85% crit rate. This is to take full advantage of her being so front-loaded with crit damage and to ensure her damage remains consistently high. Like I said, she is a bit front-loaded when it comes to attack and crit damage with her kit, teammates, relic bonuses, and Lightcones, giving her quite a lot. However, despite this, there is no harm in getting some crit damage and attack substats to improve her damage. Though with all the attack and crit damage she gets, it's very easy to get diminishing returns. So getting around 2.5 to 3.5k is pretty good depending on if you're running speed or attack boots. And around 120 to 140 crit damage outside of battle is generally good enough to enable massive damage. But for speed, there are 3 options you can go for. The first is base speed. You can make her similar to Acheron and have her allies build her ult and interpretation stacks, meaning you forego all speed investments to focus on cramming as much offensive stats on Herta to make her deal as much damage as possible. Though in some cases, you might have trouble getting her ult if you run her at base speed, especially in non-pure fiction game modes. However, running an energy support like Sunday or Huohuo, a passkey serval, and an extremely high attack frequency unit like Jade or Lingsha should solve that problem. The second option is Jade Speed. If you plan to have Herta as Jade's Death Collector, you can either go for 104 base speed or 130 speed. With Jade's bonus 30 speed, it easily lets Herta reach the 134 or 160 breakpoint while still letting her focus on offensive stats with little to no speed investments. And finally, you can go for the standard 134 breakpoint. This is actually what I'd recommend for general use, especially if you don't have extremely fast attackers like Jade or Lingsha to build their ult. Not only does it give Herta plenty of turns to help build interpretation stacks and ult, but it also lets her squeeze in a bit more damage with the extra turns. Just note, if you plan to run her with Sunday, get 135 speed so you can run the -1 speed setup with Sunday at 134. But with her build out of the way, let's move on to possible teammates. Mommy Jade is probably her best Erudition partner right now. Jade's high attack frequency not only builds a lot of interpretation stacks and ult energy for Herta, but she also brings a lot more benefits. First, she's SP positive, which is very helpful in SP management, especially if you don't have Herta's signature. And she deals quite a bit of damage herself, which is pretty good in keeping damage going during Herta's downtimes. And like I said earlier, Jade helps Herta reach speed breakpoints easily if you plan to use Herta as the Death Collector. Though there is a certain healer that's actually better for this role, but we'll talk about her later. Serval is actually another really good Erudition unit you can run with Herta. Yes, her damage may not be as good as other Erudition units, but you won't be using her solely for damage. But instead, you'll be using her as a battery for Herta. If you combine Serval's low 100 energy cost ult with a 3-star passkey Lightcone, an ER rope, ER planar set, the Eagle set, and as much speed as possible, you'll be able to spam 1 to 2 turn ults to build so much interpretation stacks and ult energy for Herta. This setup is so good for allowing Herta to spam so much ults and enhanced skills that I'm willing to say Serval is probably one of her best teammates. Argent, for the same reasons as Serval, is also a decent option since his kit is AoE oriented, which of course helps in giving Herta energy. Normally his attack frequency is a bit slow since he doesn't have FUAs and his full power ult costs a lot of energy. However, Argent can use a similar setup and build as a battery serval by only using his 90 cost ult. He's actually a bit more effective than Serval since his ult costs 10 energy less and he deals a bit more damage. Chibi Herta is also a pretty good partner for Big Herta, with Chibi Herta providing lots of ult energy and interpretation stacks for Big Herta with her AoEs and frequent follow-ups. And Big Herta is easily able to get enemies to below half health to trigger FUAs for Chibi Herta. Himiko is also a good option for fire and ice weak content, with Himiko's multi-hit attacks and high-frequency FUAs building a lot of energy and interpretation stacks for Herta. The problem is, this combo is limited to fire or ice weak content since her FUAs relies on breaks to activate. So if you want to run Herta with Himiko and non-elemental weak content, you have to run Fugue in the team as well. As for supports, her best partner right now would be the new Remembrance MC. They, more specifically Mem, give so much benefits to Herta. Not only do they give lots of crit damage, a 100% action advance, AoE attacks to help build interpretation and ult stacks, they also give Herta access to true damage, which helps Herta deal quite a bit more damage. And cause Herta has a 220 energy cost ult, she gets the full 48% true damage bonus from Mem, while Herta's partner-wide crit damage buff also makes Mem's own crit damage buff stronger, and her high energy regen rate also regens quite a bit of energy for Mem, essentially allowing Mem to use her buff and action advance more often. And as a bonus, they can also use the Penacony set to further increase Herta's damage. To no one's surprise, Robin and Rowan May are also pretty good supports to run in Herta comps. Their insane team-wide buffs and supportive utilities enables not just Herta but the second Erudition unit to deal lots of damage. I'll refrain from talking more about them since most people are probably already familiar with how good they are. Sunday is the best action advancer you can run with Herta. He provides lots of energy with his ult, which could be useful if you're having trouble getting Herta's ult, while also giving damage and crit damage buffs and an action advance to help Herta get more turns to build interpretation and energy. And of course, Herta's own crit damage buffs also end up making Sunday's own crit damage buff stronger. Hela is the best debuffer you can run with her. Not only does she provide a defense shred, but once you get her to E4, she also lowers ice res. Plus, she can also run Pearls of Sweat and the Penacony set to enable Herta to deal even more damage. Honorable mentions to Tingyun as well. Not only does she provide a pretty good attack and damage buff, she can also provide Herta bonus energy as well. Aside from this, she can run supportive Lightcones like DDD, Poise to Bloom, Dreamville, and Carve the Moon to better support the party. As for sustains, her best ones would be Aventurine and Linksha. Their high frequency of attack can give a lot of energy to Herta, while also building quite a bit of interpretation stacks despite not being Erudition units. But Linksha is a bit better for a few reasons. Her frequency of attack is faster due to the majority of her kit advancing Fu Yuan's actions. And since Linksha deals more frequent AoE damage, she ends up giving more energy to Herta while also building more interpretation stacks. And if you're running Jade as well, Linksha is actually the best depth collector in Herta teams. This is because Linksha has a way faster AoE attack frequency than Herta due to Fu Yuan, which enables Jade to follow up attack way more often, resulting in more interpretation stacks and ult energy for Herta than if she was the depth collector herself. Huohuo is also another great option. Not only does she provide an attack buff for the whole party, she also provides team-wide energy, which is helpful for Herta and the team to get their ults faster. And plus, she can also use Quid Pro Quo to give even more energy. And lastly, as usual, Gallagher is the best budget healer you can use. Just like Huohuo, he can hold Quid Pro Quo to provide some energy while also being good for SP generation. With her possible teammates out of the way, let's cook up some teams. Before we cook up some teams, it is very important that you always have another Erudition unit with her in the team, otherwise her damage output drops significantly. But with that being said, her best team right now is a comp with Jade, with your support and sustain being a flex. For this showcase, I'm using the new Remembrance MC and Linksha, but you can use whoever support you like, with examples being Rowan Mei, Sunday, Robin, Hela, or even Tingyun. And this comp will be able to clear content just fine. You could also say the same for the sustain slot. However, Linksha is the best choice because like I said earlier, you can set her as Jade's death collector instead of Herta because her higher AoE attack frequency enables more FUAs from Jade. And with Linksha and Jade's frequent AoEs combined, it results in a ton of interpretation and ult energy generated for Herta. For this comp, you can build Herta with little to no speed investments to focus on more offensive stats to output as much damage as possible. This is because a combo of Jade and Linksha basically just builds interpretation and Herta's ults for her. But if you don't have Linksha, any sustain like Aventurine or Huohuo would do. Just make sure to set your Death Collector to any unit with the highest attack frequency. This team of course has no trouble clearing MOC and can easily achieve high scores in Pure Fiction. It's also viable in Ice or Quantum Weak Apocalyptic Shadow. All of this is a result of Herta's insanely high single and AoE damage from her ult and enhanced skills, which the team, specifically Jade, enables Herta to spam due to the high amount of energy and interpretation she provides her. But if you don't have Jade, you can always just use little Herta instead. Just like Jade, Herta with her high AoE frequency is able to provide lots of interpretation and ult energy for Herta and content with lots of enemies, essentially enabling Herta to deal lots of damage while easily clearing enemy waves and achieving high scores in Pure Fiction. However, in content without a lot of enemies like MOC or Apocalyptic Shadow, Chibi Herta's attack frequency slows down quite a bit because of fewer enemies being present to activate her FUAs, meaning Chibi Herta would end up generating less energy and interpretation for Mommy Herta. Now, you can still get 42 interpretation stacks reliably, but getting her ult consistently in MOC or AS can become a problem. But there are several solutions to get around this. You can either invest in more speed for Big Herta or run an action advancer to give her more turns for energy generation. You can also run an energy battery like Huohuo Seokwo, Tingyun, or Sunday with their bonus energy letting Herta get more consistent ults. Or you can run an extremely high attack frequency sustain like Aventurine or Lingsha to make up for Chibi Herta's slower attack frequency. Either way you go, this comp will be able to clear MOC or Ice Weak AS reliably as long as you take the appropriate measures to account for Chibi Herta's slower attack frequency. But if you don't want to run Herta with Herta, you can also run her with Himiko as well. This team is pretty good for clearing Ice or Fire Weak content rather reliably and can easily get high scores in Pure Fiction, with Himiko's FUAs reliably generating energy and interpretation stacks for Herta, enabling big damage. However, this comp is limited to Fire and Ice Weak content and its performance drops significantly outside of it due to Himiko's FUAs being reliant on breaking enemies. And finally, you can run Herta with a Battery, Argentee, or Serval, with the supports and sustain of course being flexes again. With Serval or Argentee being equipped with a battery-oriented build and passkey, they can spam their ults so much, which results in them building lots of energy and interpretation stacks for Herta. This of course results in Herta being able to spam her ults and enhance skills more frequently, resulting in more damage. Honestly, before testing, I didn't really expect this team to be that good, since Serval doesn't really deal good damage, while Argentee's own damage gets significantly lower due to having a 3-star light cone. However, I was wrong. This team is actually her second best one, performing similarly to the Herta and Jade comp. While yes, Argentee and Serval deal pretty low damage, this team makes up for it by spamming Herta nukes. This team, just like the Jade team, has no trouble clearing any form of content, and it can reliably clear MOC and electric or physical weak Apocalyptic Shadow, while also being able to reach high scores in Pure Fiction, all because of Herta spamming nukes. The only downside to this comp is you get tired of hearing Argentee and Serval's ult dialogue over and over again. But some people may like that, and I'm one of them. Help, I'm gonna go insane if I hear fight it or rock with it one more time. Another good thing about this comp is you can run a completely free-to-play variation of it with Serval, RMC, and Gallagher, meaning it's pretty accessible to both free-to-play players and newbies. But that's about it because I'm beginning to lose my voice. But there's just one last question. Is she a must pull? As usual, it depends on the state of your account. If you have a lot of top tier DPSs that can reliably clear any type of endgame content and are satisfied with their performance while doing so, she's not really a must pull. In this case, it's much better to save someone that will benefit your account. Remember, Robin and Lingsha are also rerunning this update, and they just keep getting stronger and stronger with every new unit coming out. So if you're lacking a good sustain or a good support, those two are better options. And with other 3.x characters and the Fate collab coming, it might not be a bad idea to start saving Jades for characters that might interest you more. I'm looking at you, man, with the fantastic abs whose name I can't pronounce. Aside from this, there's only one disappointing fact about her that might not make her a must pull. It's so game-breakingly bad that she might just become unplayable to some. She doesn't say or do this. Disclaimer, this is a joke by the way. However, she definitely is a must-pull if you're lacking a good DPS for either Pure Fiction, MOC, and even Apocalyptic Shadow. She's a versatile DPS that can tackle and carry you in just about any endgame content in the game with her insane AoE and single target damage output. She's also able to fit in a good number of premium and budget teams while also having a good selection of light cones, so she's not too expensive to use. And she's also rather easy to build due to all the attack buffs and crit damage she gets from her kit, allowing you to focus on other stats. All of these points are of course pretty good for both new and veteran players. Now I can't guarantee her future value due to this game's power creep, but due to her innate synergy with Erudition units, it's safe to say she'll definitely get way more possible teammates when more crit-based or high attack frequency Erudition units get added. So she might just get even stronger in the future. But at the end of the day though, if you like Herta, pull for her. I am personally doing so just because I find her super pretty and I like her new design. And yes, I am willing to go bankrupt for her. I mean, just look how pretty she is with that giant witch hat. But make sure to tell me what you think about her in the comments below, and don't forget to hit me with a like and a sub.